My name is Earl Willis Jr. Today is May 2nd, 2017. I work for the Warren County Public Library. We're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Today I'm speaking to Mr. John Carr. Mr. Carr, where and when were you born?
I was born in Taylorsville, Kentucky on August the 15th, 1928.
1928. Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have a sister that lives in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and a brother who served in the Air Force.
Okay.
And he lives in Blacksburg, Virginia.
Okay. Did you just kind of answer my other question? Do you have any family that served in the military? You said your brother did. Did your father did?
My father was a graduate of Western Kentucky. My mother and father met in the class in 1927.
Okay.
And he was in ROTC.
Okay.
Western, but that's the extent of his military service.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was in high school. I was 13 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and when I graduated from high school in 1945, most of the combat had ended, but they still had the draft going to support the occupation force.
Yes, sir.
And I was one of my father was a high school principal, and one of his students flew in the Battle of Midway.
Oh, really?
And he praised him. So my ambition at that time was to be a naval aviator.
Okay.
I was going to go to Annapolis and then go to Pensacola and become a naval aviator. But I arranged with Congressman Shelf for a Annapolis appointment, and each congressman can nominate 4 people for each midshipman slot, and there's a principal and a third alderman, and you have to qualify in 3 ways: physically, education-wise, or mentally, and get a congressional appointment. And the way it works, if the principal fails to meet the requirements, why everybody moves up a slot.
Okay.
And he made it, so I didn't advance any that year after graduation. I came down to Western to brush up on my math and science. I knew that I was weak in that area. And so I wrote the congressman and asked him if there was a chance for another appointment. He was non-committal, and I didn't understand it then, but I do now. But I was faced with turning 18 and having to register for the draft, so I'd given it some consideration. I didn't want to be drafted. I felt like that was kind of second-class service. I'd rather pick my branch, and I thought that the Marine Corps had the best reputation.
Okay.
And I still do.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And so I turned 18 and went down to the draft board and registered, and then went right into Louisville and signed up for the Marine Corps.
Okay. And so you picked the Marine Corps, and you kind of touched on that. Well, why was it you picked the Marine Corps over the other branches?
I thought they had the best reputation.
Okay.
I had a sensational senior year in high school.
Okay.
And I was highly motivated, and it was a patriotic time.
Yes, sir. Yeah. During like the late early 40s, very patriotic.
So I wanted to serve what I thought was the best. So I enlisted and went through boot camp at Paris Island.
Paris Island. What time of year is that?
That was August through November, I guess,
Okay.
that we
So-
were in Paris Island.
Paris Island in August is very hot, humid, right?
I grew up a lot in that
Yeah.
time period. Served with a bunch of boys from Georgia. And at the end of boot camp, I was tall and pretty squared away. And at that time, the Marines had ships detachments on the major ships, the battleships, the cruisers, and the carriers. And they selected me for the seagoing
Okay.
detachment. And the sea school was at the Marine Recruit Depot in San Diego. So after boot camp, I went to San Diego through sea school.
What do you remember most about boot camp at Camp Lejeune?
A lot of running in sand.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And I had anticipated the haircut. They give you they start right here and go all the way back.
Yeah.
And it was funny to see people that you didn't recognize after they had that haircut.
Haircut, yeah.
And some big guys with tears in their eyes.
Really? Yeah.
But I was fairly athletic and intelligent enough to stay out of trouble. So
Do you ever remember writing your mother or father when you were in?
one of the interesting things, the first mail that we got in boot camp was a card from the draft board classifying me 1A, and the platoon got a big kick.
Yeah.
It was already, the mother was proud. She hung a service star in the front window.
Yeah. Do you remember? I mean, in the Marines in the Pacific, they did a lot of the fight. Do you remember watching that on television or not? Or not much television, but radio and.
Yeah, followed the war on the news, and we took the Courier Journal, so I
Okay.
followed it in there.
Yeah.
And that the Marines had a reputation of taking care of their wounded, and they wouldn't leave you out there on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So,
I've noticed your top pin, and that's the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Is that right?
Right.
Can you tell us what that represents?
the eagle, I think, is part of the national bird, and
Okay.
our origin was during the Revolutionary War. They had Marines on the sailing ships that would they would be marksmen that would get up in the crow's nest and shoot
Okay.
down on the other ships.
Yeah.
So that reflects the beginning of we were the Navy's fighting force,
Yeah.
landing force.
So after you left Paris Island, what was your specific training? What was your as they say, your MOS? What was your specific job?
The Marines on the seagoing detachments would serve as the captains, orderlies, and stand quarterdeck watches and brig watches. And during general quarters, they would man the anti-aircraft guns.
Okay.
So during that time at sea school, had two training cruises on a light cruiser, the USS Atlanta, and we would go out and fire drones.
Do you remember doing your training? Can you tell us what kind of guns you fired?
There were 20 millimeter, either single or dual, and then the 40 millimeter, they had 4 of those on a gun mount.
Did you ever shoot the big 50 caliber? Did you ever shoot that?
The Navy manned
50
those.
cals? Yeah.
One day we were to prepare the loaded magazines, and to make sure that the magazine, they were spring loaded, they had to lubricate the round that went in there.
Okay.
So the Navy chief had us greasing these rounds, and the round had a setback fuse. It wouldn't explode until it was fired, and that setback momentum would arm the fuse.
Yeah.
Well, we're working with greasy hands, and one fellow dropped the round, a 40 millimeter round, and the chief didn't know whether that had activated the fuse or not. So he picked it up, threw it overboard, and it happened to hit one of the 5-inch barrels that were trained out, but it didn't explode.
Okay. That's kind of nerve-wracking, right?
My luck.
Yeah.
So I consider myself very lucky for it. Well, after I graduated from C school, most of the fellows in my class were getting orders to Pearl Harbor,
Okay.
to Hawaii. And I wanted to get back on the East Coast, and my congressman wrote me that he had another alternate appointment, and that would place me back at the Naval Academy Prep School at Bainbridge, Maryland.
Okay.
So I accepted the appointment, and was assigned to the Marine Detachment at the Naval Gun Factory in Washington, D.C. They didn't have a Marine administrative office at the prep school. So I went through there and on up to Bainbridge, Maryland, which is right in between Baltimore and Philadelphia. And actually, this was in February, and the classes, I think, started in September, so I was kind of a late start there. But we're taking classes in English and math to kind of bring us up to speed, because the Naval Academy accepts 200 enlisted each year from the prep school.
Okay.
And they're trying to prepare the people that go through there to compete with the East Coast prep schools at the Naval Academy.
Can you tell us a little bit about Annapolis? Can you tell us about maybe where it's at and what it is?
It's in Maryland, very close to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. It's about 30 miles from each of those cities.
Okay.
And it, I think, was formed in, 1846 or something.
Okay.
But one of the experiences that I remember was our battalion was chosen to march in President Harry Truman's inaugural parade.
Okay, yeah, tell me about that. Yeah.
So they put us on a bus, and we rode from Annapolis down to the capital, the nation capital, and marched down Constitution Avenue and passed the reviewing stand.
Did you see President Truman?
I saw him out of the corner of my eye, and the Congress declared an end to the World War II, in I guess December of 1946, and I have a letter signed by President Truman thanking me for my service.
Oh, that's, yeah.
And awarded me the World War II Victory Medal. And I repaid him by marching in his inaugural parade.
Did you get to dress it? Did you get to march in your dress blue uniform, or were you in your?
No, I was a midshipman at the
Okay.
time, so we were in the Navy.
Okay.
Technically, I guess I've served 4 years in the U.S. Navy as a midshipman.
So after you graduated from Annapolis, where did your military career take you from there?
The couple of interesting things happened my senior year there at the academy. I had a call from the commandant of midshipmen to report to him, and I didn't have the slightest idea what it was about, but if you were in trouble with the commandant of midshipmen, you were in serious trouble. So I brushed off my uniform and touched up my shoe shine and reported, and he told me to stand at ease, that Mrs. Harvey Ream of Hershey, Pennsylvania, had decided to give her son's uniforms to a Marine graduate in our class. And he asked me if I remembered Bob Ream, and he was a Medal of Honor winner from Hershey. That he was on the Academy wrestling team and dated one of the prettiest girls in the midshipman store.
Okay.
So, and he was a former Marine that enlisted 2 classes ahead of me. But he was killed in the Chauvet Reservoir action.
Okay.
The Marines were advancing towards the Chinese border, and the Chinese entered the Korean War with several divisions, and the Marines had to turn around and fight their way out.
Yeah. So you're talking about the Korean War now,
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
right. And Bob Ream was killed in that. The Chinese had blocked the road. They were on a ridge blocking the position, and Ream's platoon was ordered to clear them out, and they'd been repelled a couple of times. They were fighting uphill, and he had a conference with his platoon, his sergeants, to setting up a plan to reorganize, and a grenade fell in the midst of the group, and he leapt on it and took the blast of the grenade.
Yeah.
And he was awarded the Medal of Honor for that. So,
Yeah. That was very brave.
and about this time, I was feeling pretty good about myself. Out of 49 Marine lieutenants, I was being selected to get the uniform of a Medal of Honor.
Oh, yeah.
And so I asked the captain, the Navy captain, just how was I selected for this, and he kind of ashamed now. He put me in my place. He said the best we can determine you were the same physical size as.
Oh, really?
They had pictures of us for posture.
Oh, okay.
And, but it wasn't any special thing of me. I just happened to be the
Same
right
size.
size for it.
Yeah.
And the last thing the captain said to me, you be sure and write Ms. Ream, thank her. So I wrote her a letter and I told her how much we appreciate it. There was a green service uniform and a tan service uniform and the dress blues and the dress whites and all the buttons and the cap. And must have been about $500 worth of uniforms
Yeah, that's
in,
really
that,
honor,
in
wasn't
that
it?
box.
Yeah.
And I told her how much I appreciated that. The Navy, all they had to do was tear off the midshipman stripes and put the half-inch Navy braid
Okay.
on their uniform, but the Marines had to buy a complete new set of uniform.
Okay.
Well, I had chosen the Marines because I'd taken the aviation physical that spring, and I was 20/30 in one eye and 20/40 in the other, and that disqualified me for aviation.
Okay.
So I figured I better get back in the Marine Corps, and after I applied for the Marine Corps, I learned that the Marines wanted 20/20 for their officers, but the fact that I'd been a enlisted Marine, they granted me a waiver.
Okay.
Another lucky.
Yeah.
So I told Mrs. Ream how much I appreciated the uniforms, that it saved me a lot of money, and that how much we appreciated the sacrifice of her son. And it kind of surprised me. She wrote me back right away, and we exchanged letters several times before I graduated that June.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that she was adopting me
As her son?
as her son.
Yeah.
And it was a nice situation. She would send us a box of chocolates from
Yeah.
Hershey.
Yeah. She was dealing with the best she could, wasn't she?
Yeah, and that was a little unnerving because here you're taking the place of a Medal of Honor. And I'd been through Paris Island boot camp and the academy, and I figured I had pretty good training for but we knew we were all going to Korea, so the next orders were to Camp Pendleton, awaiting transfer to Korea.
Can you tell me about some of your
Well,
your experience?
wait a minute, I skipped
Okay.
at the end of basic school, we had to declare a specialty, infantry, armor, artillery, and I was fascinated with things technical, so I chose communications.
Okay.
And the orders were to the communications officer school. It was also there at Quantico. I went home and got married and came back and finished COS and was headed for Korea. We waited at Camp Pendleton, and they flew us over in one of the flying boats, the airplanes that can land on water.
Yeah, yeah.
And got there in July of 1952.
52.
And the first assignment was at I was the communications officer for the rear supply agent at Ascon City, which is right in between Incheon and Seoul on the coast. And
Okay.
we were stationed in an old Japanese munitions factory in World War II. They had steel reinforced concrete buildings that the windows had been blown out of, and we put plastic in the windows, and they had the radio squad in the one of the warehouses that had a penthouse on top, but they were sleeping on the second floor, and this was the highest area in the compounds. So they put a air raid siren up there, and I was the air raid marshal for the base. And when the Japanese, the North Koreans had we called washing machine Charlie, that flew a Russian-made prop-driven aircraft over and threw out propaganda. Leaflets and occasional grenade and mortar shell. So we had and the troops would go into an underground rifle range that the Japanese had built, but it had standing water, and it wasn't an unpleasant. It was very unpleasant being down there. And after about 3 times at that, the colonel said, until they actually start dropping bombs, well, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
So that was one memory there. After serving 6 months, the standard tour was a year. The communications officers switched. The frontline communications officers would rotate to the rear units, and the ones that were back, like myself, would move up. And I was assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines.
Okay.
And it was a relatively peaceful time. The units had lined up across the 38th parallel at that time, and it was trench warfare.
Okay.
We were all dug in on our side.
Kind of a standstill, right?
Right. And we had a supply problem keeping our artillery supplied, and I'm sure they had a much worse one, because they wouldn't shoot at you unless you showed yourself. So being careful about that.
Yeah.
I got shot at several times, but never hit. And,
Yeah.
The unit had been occupied before. We moved in to relieve the 5th Marines, and after a while, I began to get looking for things to do, and it concerned me that we had a combat outpost, that we had 2 companies in the line, and in front of the left company there was a knob that was out in front of the wire and the minefields that could look both ways down the valley and keep an eye on things. And they had a platoon stationed out there, and I had a couple of radio men and a couple of wiremen that were assigned to that group. And it began to bother me a little bit that maybe I was asking my people to do something that I wasn't able to do. So I went to the CO and asked him what he thought about his commo being out in front of the wire, that I felt like I needed to make an inspection trip out. And he said, do whatever you think is necessary to, so I considered that a yes and arranged they had a night supply that would take ammo and rations and water out to this outpost. So I made arrangements to go out with them one night, and I got right up behind the lead and had my 45 in my hand. I was really jacked up.
Yeah.
And being careful where I step, because you're going through minefields and gaps in the wire. And heard a murmur in the distance, and I dropped down and raised my 45. About that time, I heard the lead give the countersign, and it was Marines coming the other way.
Okay.
And I didn't have to, I thought, well, I had almost, I could have caused the problem and
Yeah.
killed him. So I put my pistol in my holster and went the rest of the way. The place out there was pretty barren. They had blasted all the vegetation off of it. It was bare ground, and they dug in holes, but they were, made it back, and I went through the whole war without firing a shot in anger, so
Yeah. Do
I'm
you,
not one of your Marine warriors, I guess.
well, that's, do you, I've studied and talked to people that talked about the Korean War. It talks about sometimes the Chinese would have like bugles and stuff. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear them blowing the bugles and running to the snow?
Yeah, they, one thing that, after a couple of months on the front line, we moved back to the rear rest area, and all the company, headquarters company officers lived in the same tent. So I was living with another Medal of Honor winner this is Lieutenant George Murphy from Big Spring, Tennessee. Big Spring, Texas, excuse me. He was won his Medal of Honor and the Battle of the Hook. The trench line in the 7 Marines area looked like a map of Cape Cod. The trench line came up and did a hook, and they couldn't properly support it with artillery, and the Chinese got in the trench,
Yeah.
same trench. And of course the battalion CO couldn't tolerate that, so I don't know whether George volunteered or he got selected, but his platoon was going to retake the trench. And there, he was a leader that always led from the front. He was completely fearless. And it's follow me, man. And they had to attack over a ridge and into the trench on the other side. And they it was small arms and grenades primarily, but they fought their way up to the top, and he looked around, and he was the only one there. So his platoon had gotten bogged down
Yeah.
down the hill, so he fought his way back down the hill, collected the group, and they attacked again. And he got shot through his right arm. He was right-handed.
Okay.
He just put his weapon in his
Oh,
left
the left
hand
hand, yeah.
and fought their way up again and held it. And that's the way you win the Medal of Honor.
Sounded like he was a leader and
Yeah,
a
he
warrior
was.
too.
He lived, that was his second Purple Heart. And after 2 wounds, why they put you in a job in the rear area. He was the assistant intelligence officer when I
Yeah.
first met him. But that's the one thing that I remembered. We got a new CEO, Lieutenant Colonel John Paul Jones, that and he wanted to. He thought that the unit morale needed boosting, and his solution was a battalion parade. And the Black Watch Battalion, the Canadian regiment with their pipes and
Yeah.
drums, were a joining unit. He contacted them, and they provided the music for the parade. So I marched in a parade to the bagpipes and drums.
Yeah.
And that lasted until July of '53, and rotated back. We rotated back on a troop ship and got rested up, cleaned up, and assigned to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina,
Okay.
as a communications battalion. And one of the memories there, I was the executive officer of the communications company. We provided communications augmentation for troops that were, or units that needed help in whatever task they were assigned. So they needed a person, an officer that was familiar with the court martial proceedings. So we had to send an officer to the Naval Justice School, and I got selected for that, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. And we were expecting the birth of our son about that time.
Okay.
And Cheryl opted to go with me to Newport, and we finished the school, and our son still wasn't there.
Yeah.
We had an anxious week, but finally he was delivered, and he's born in Newport. We had an article about him that listed him as a native of Newport. He'd been there 5 days.
Okay.
But back to Camp Lejeune, and in December, after about a year and a half in the Com Battalion, they formed the second 15mm howitzer battalion. It's a new a howitzer a bigger gun than the 155s that the infantry battalions had as their own artillery. And that was an interesting tour that we would go over to Fort Bragg, North Carolina,
Okay.
and shoot. They had more area there than, it's hard to shoot in Camp Lejeune without shooting over a manned area or something.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we were coming back from one of the shoots at Fort Bragg, and one of the message center people came out and said, "The lieutenant, you know you got orders?" I said, "No, where?" I had made the application for postgraduate training. They'd been a bulletin asking for volunteers or applicants for postgraduate training, and I always thought that maybe that was what I needed to do to advance my career. So I asked him if it was the postgraduate school, and he said no. He said that you're going to recruiting duty in Buffalo.
Okay.
So they told me I was going to have to put in at least a year and a half there. And that was an interesting time for recruiting duty. This was in, I guess 56. They
Okay.
They had an incident at Paris Island where a platoon was acting up, and the drill sergeant fell them in at night and marched them through the swamp there, and the tail end of the column got out where the water was over their head, and one of the recruits drowned.
Yeah.
And at that time, the Marines could enlist a 17-year-old, but you needed both parents' consent.
Okay.
And we weren't getting any mother's consent for
Yeah.
a while, so it made it kind of rough for a while. But by holding back a couple of applicants and planning for a big month, we were one of the first recruiting stations to make our quota. After that, we didn't have any trouble. And from there, they assigned me to a Navy staff, an admiral's, the Fib Pac 3, and he had an option. He could either have his staff at the amphibious base on Coronado, California, suburb of San Diego, or he could have it aboard ship. And the admiral wanted the shipboard, so we were they had 5 Marines that helped the Marines anytime they had an amphibious operation where we were there to help them plan it and execute it.
Yeah.
I was on 7 different ships over 2 years.
Yeah.
At that time, the war in Vietnam had started, and the ships were rotating back and forth westback, and a ship would come back and discharge their short timers and put on new crew, and then we'd go out and train abandoned ship and
Yeah.
fire drills and all that. And we would go out and cruise up and down the coast. We could look over and see the lights of San Diego, but we would spend Monday to Friday out there and come home.
Can you tell me about some of your experiences in Vietnam? Maybe what years you got there?
The tour after my tour with the FIB group was to Defense Communications Agency, a joint staff. All branches are called Purple Suiters. But I was stationed at the Colorado Springs, and the unit, the DCA post in Vietnam requested augmentation. So I was selected as one of the, I think we sent 5 officers and a couple enlisted, and it was a different experience. We had to get passports and travel in civilian clothes. I didn't know whether we were going on a CIA assignment or something. It wasn't. We went right in to augment the unit that was there at Tonsanute Air Base, and I was assigned I was a major and selected for lieutenant colonel at the time, and as more senior than they really wanted. I think they wanted a lieutenant that they could send up country, but they made me operations officer there at the Tonsanute Air Base. And being TDY, you had to arrange your own living. So I roomed with in the villa outside the base there and I was there the night that they blew up the ammunition depot at Long Bend. I don't know how much ammo went up that night, but it made a terrific bang, and
Was it like small? Was it like small arms ammunition? Or
no, it was artillery. And bombs.
Oh, okay.
And it shook the windows pretty bad. And I'd heard that that was one of the techniques, is to set off an explosion and get you to come to the window, and then they'd set off another window where you'd catch you exposed. So I jumped out of bed and laid it on the floor to make sure they didn't explode another one. But that was the extent of that. Another morning, the bus was running late, and we were only about 3 or 4 blocks from the Tonsanute Air Base. I just walked up there, and they had a long line of Vietnamese workers lined up outside the gate. They weren't letting them in. And I was wearing my uniform, so they just let me pass on through. And after I got to the unit, I found out that the Viet Cong had staged a raid on the air base and blown up a couple of airplanes in the flight line, and they eventually repelled them. But when they turned one of them over, they discovered he was a barber at the base barber shop.
Oh, really?
But that assignment only lasted 3 or 4 months, so I made it home for Christmas. My last assignment was after I finished at DCA, was with the Naval Electronic Systems Command. I had a secondary specialty MOS of aviation electronics officer, in addition to my communications officer. And we were responsible for the procurement of the Marine Corps' communication and radar equipment. And when I got there, I was the deputy to a full colonel, Sam Dressing. But they had another assignment for Sam, so they sent him to his new assignment, and I was acting director for that unit. And we would write the specifications for the equipment and handle the technical administration of the contract and the testing. And we had over $300 million in contracts.
So what year is this, like late 60s?
That's the late 60s. I retired in 1970.
Okay. So were you already a lieutenant colonel by then?
I was lieutenant colonel. I actually made pinned the bars on in Vietnam.
Okay.
I had the
Can you tell us about how you felt when you made lieutenant colonel? How was that? Can you tell us about that?
that was great. We had a great wedding down party. There were a couple of clubs in Saigon so we arranged to meet at the club at the Rex Hotel in Saigon. I had these soldiers and naval officers all singing the Marines hymn.
So you remember that's pretty special. Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great. But after retired, I went to Penn State for a year. They had a program called General Engineering for people that wanted to teach engineering.
Okay.
That was about half electronics and half higher education courses, And while that was going on, Western was just starting an engineering technology program.
Okay.
And I stopped by to see if there was an opening there, and the department head told me that he'd already filled his opening for that year, that if I could find some way to survive for a year, that he could practically guarantee me a position the next fall. So that's when I went to Penn State. I had a stipend there and my GI Bill.
But you finally you did come back to Bowling Green in Western, right?
Right. That was in the fall of 1971.
Okay.
And I hope that my career would serve as an example for somebody considering going into the service, that as an example of a way that they can use service experience for a second career. I taught for 20 plus years.
Okay. And what did you teach?
Electrical engineering technology. I was the program coordinator for that group.
So you talked about the early 90s, is that right?
Yeah, it seemed like I went on early retirement. Western has a program that you teach part-time. You don't have any committee assignments, so you can teach your class and go home.
Okay.
And about that time, my parents were in their 90s and in a nursing home, up in Taylorsville in Spencer County. So I was able to go up and visit them once a week or every 10 days.
I bet your parents were proud of you, weren't they?
Yeah, I think it was. So I feel very fortunate and very lucky. I never had to write one of those letters home for any of my people that were killed.
Yeah, that would be really hard.
That would have been hard.
Yeah, it would be. So when you left Western, where did you go there, and where did you and your family do from there?
We continued on. My community service is in the Lions Club.
Okay. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I thought that it was important to be involved in some community service, and the Lions Club is one of the world's largest international clubs.
Okay.
And their service function has been vision, site preservation.
Yeah.
So I've been president of the Noon Lions for a couple of times.
Okay.
And the held most of the offices in the club, but we're buy eyeglasses for school children and conduct eye screenings for preschool.
Okay.
And we have a first-class Kentucky Lions Eye Foundation that does operations and research, and we support the Lions International, which their main program is Sight First, which is has the goal of conquering preventable blindness. And so it's
Seems like you like to help people. Yeah.
yeah.
In closing, this is the time that this is your interview. So, if the people that are watching this interview, what would you want them to take away from this interview about your service, or anything you have to say, or?
I'm very thankful for the opportunity to serve. I think I've gained more from my service than I've had to give. And I've met some very fine people in the service, and wouldn't trade anything for that experience, but I wouldn't want to do it again.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm hoping that my experience will serve as an example for some of the younger people that might be considering a service career, and an example of how they can use their service to build a career.
Yeah. Well, I think you're a fine example.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I wanted to appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your service and everything you've done, and I appreciate this interview.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.